Ayo, which international day will we have? You should have International Day of Joke.
I was going to say International Day of Joy.
Joy, Joke.
No, the International Day of Joke.
No.
But no, we're not talking about that for now. We're talking about International Day of Forests. You know? That's what we're talking about today, so please take us to it.
All right, so the International Day of the Forest and selected theme for 2026 is Forest and Economics. How can this impact our economies? Emphasizing that forests mean business. This theme highlights the critical role forests play in driving sustainable economic prosperity and sustaining global livelihoods. Forests support over 1.6 billion people for their livelihoods and employ millions in sectors like conservation, research, ecotourism. Sustainable forest products also serve as nature-based alternatives to carbon-intensive materials, opening new economic opportunities, and so on and so forth. We can go on and on and on.
You really don't know about this matter, do you? So let the experts speak.
I know enough. Why? Right, so we have Dr. Joseph Onoja, Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. He's here in the studio with us. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
And to my left, I have Dr. Eugene Itwa, CEO, Natural Eco Capital. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Happy International Day of Forests.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed.
You didn't wish him the same.
Sorry?
You didn't wish him the same. Happy International Day.
They are together.
So both of us, so and everybody actually.
Maybe we should begin, Dr. Noja, by asking how conscious you think the Nigerian population in particular is about forests. Because once we have forests, most of the time, unfortunately, it's not for the very good reasons. Forests is where bandits hide. It's where lions and all those life-threatening activities are conjured in the mind. Mm-hmm. Forests are synonymous with horror films. No, like that. So maybe we should begin with that, helping us to understand what forests are for us, what they do for us, and what appreciation we should be giving.
So thank you very much for having me and for having us and to discuss this very important topic about forests. And as you rightly pointed out, there is a misconception which shouldn't be because of probably Hollywood and because of the reality we are facing in Nigeria. When you talk about Sambisa Forest and all of those places, what comes to mind? Because it's one of my mentors that actually established that forest, the person of Hall. It was one who established that forest in the 1970s when he came in as an expatriate biologist living in Maiduguri. And the last time I was with him last week, he was still recalling those with nostalgia when he was establishing those forests and how he used to go around the forest. And also, I was studied in Yankari Game Reserve and how we used to go around all of those places and all of that. So I could feel what he was feeling. So coming to your question about how people perceive forests these days, which shouldn't be, because forests are the lungs of the earth. And without the forest, without the ecosystem, without the habitat, we as humans cannot thrive. Unfortunately, it's being used for what is not supposed to be used about, especially in Nigeria, where we have insurgency and people hiding there to commit all sorts of crimes. But they play very, very important role for our well-being. Because without our forest, apart from humans, even businesses will not be able to thrive. And that's the reality. So as humans, we cannot be apart from our forest. We are part of it. And that is what sustains life. So when we look at forests as our lifeline to our continuous living here on earth, then we will be able to appreciate it despite and in spite of all of the challenges that we are having.
Dr. Itwa, I'm not sure that most industrialists were in the class when this was being taught in life. Or maybe they left the WhatsApp group. Or maybe they didn't just get the memo, because we continue to face significant deforestation and ecosystem loss. When you hear development, what we know as development is deforestation in some ways. Pull down the trees, let the buildings come up. You know, so I'm now hearing terms like industrial forests, or something like that, where the tall skyscrapers have taken the place of tall trees and all those
concrete
things.
jungle, you mean?
Thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. Concrete jungle. So what are the key drivers of this, and why should this concern not just environmentalists but businesses as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. And you've just given a beautiful description. Concrete jungles. When we talk about drivers of deforestation, we're simply saying, what are those things that we do to remove the forest, simply put? And you just talked about development. Infrastructure is one key driver. Urban development is another one. What about firewood use and then illegal logging? And if I come back to firewood use, we want to recognize that for us as a nation, if you talk about household energy use, a number of us depend on fuel use, wood. And so where do we get the wood? From the forest. And so in other words, if there is no electricity from the grid, what it implies is that we will take our axe and go into the forest and chop down the trees. That is one of the key drivers today. And so if you also look at the impact that is coming from it, he just talked about, the beauty and the like. Let's talk about the collapse of the grid, for instance. If you look at the dams, the Shiroro, Jeba, and the like, what actually support them to ensuring that we have optimal supply of energy from them is the trees you have all around them. Yep. When you pull them down from the catchment, what you are simply doing is to tell us we do not need that optimal supply from those hydro dams. And so you have all of that. For business, it's not just, so in other words, if we now look at it, chopping down the trees, and then looking at the drivers, you're also saying that energy security is in question for us. We have a challenge with that. What about water security? It's also a challenge because I just talked about the dam. Sedimentation of those dams coming to it. Even flood control is also another challenge. The function will not be there. For businesses, it simply means that what they are dependent on is also suffering. There are two things here. The business depends on the environment. So in other words, there are impacts from them as well. What is it that the business takes from the environment? In taking, what do they also do to impact on the environment? So dependencies and impacts is what we see. For instance, if we talk about the impact, if you look at it, the pollution we see all around us today, it's from industrial processes, in most cases. If you look at waste generation, and so on and so forth, all of those things are impacts arising.
There's a bit of a disconnect, Dr. Itua, from the importance of forests and what we call development. We need to find a way to make that connect. Because this whole idea of, maybe I should bring it to you, this whole idea of deforestation has always been, even in the Americas, when America was growing into the world power it is today, they also had their own fair share of such challenges. So we need to get that balance.
Yeah.
Right. So what would be your recommendation in that
So,
regard?
and that is why, from research, because we need evidence-based approach, there are areas we call sensitive areas. You talk about areas like wetlands. You talk about areas like watershed areas. You talk about areas like sensitive areas that, for instance, if you have an area that is susceptible to landslide and so on, these are areas that have been carved out to be protected. And that is why you have protected areas where you have some animals who are also living in that habitat that are also playing what we call the ecosystem service that they provide for us. An ecosystem service are the services that nature provides for us, which we depend on and which we enjoy.
But we don't know that
We don't know that. And that is where, from the picture he painted, you see, people did not connect deforestation with the collapse in national grid. Because what happens is that when you deforest, you leave the land bare. And when you leave the land bare, when it rains, there is a lot of runoff and erosion. And all of this topsoil that is being washed off goes into the stream. And when that happens, there's sediment, and then it stops the water from flowing as it should. So it starts all the way. So there won't be enough water from the different tributaries that goes into the dam, and then there's reduction of water, and then there is not much water for it to be able to power the hydro dams. So we are not averse to development, but that development must be done in sensitive ways. When you see a forest is not just a place that is waiting to be cleared for development, but we must be able to look at them and segment them, which areas are to be cleared, which areas are to be developed. I'll give a classical example of the Lekki axis. There is, before the Lekki Conservation Center, there is an intersection now, it used to be a roundabout, called the Igbo Efon. And Igbo Efon means forest of buffaloes. Instead of buffaloes now, instead of trees, we have concrete. Now, what has happened is that the ecosystem service that those places are supposed to be providing are all gone. So the Lekki Conservation Center, we are receiving much, much water than we should have received ordinarily, because every other place has been sand-filled. So imagine that the cubic of water that we are receiving in that center, we also sand-filled that center. Where would that water go to? That means that place will be unlivable, even with the flooding that we already have. So all the water coming all the way from Agungi ends up in that place. So that is why I'm saying that there are some areas that we shouldn't develop. We should allow the forest to play its role. And you see, these animals that we have, they play their own role in the environment as nature has placed them there. Because there are some things that even if we have the money, we will not be able to produce as effective. And the common one is oxygen. Imagine that the trees around us are all high level, high efficient oxygen plants. Plants as in manufacturing plants. But they do it quietly and so effectively. So imagine you have that kind of machinery running on diesel. Imagine the noise. Imagine the uncomfortability that you'll be feeling while they are producing their oxygen. But plants do it so quietly and so efficient. But we remove those things and then replace them with our inefficient machines, and then we are also paying for it. What nature will have done it for us free. So that is why, to answer your question directly, we are not averse to development, but development must be done with nature in mind so that we don't end up developing as wise fools.
Interesting. I think they should be inviting you for every energy summit.
Right. So, but, education also plays an important part, Dr. Itwa. He has said a lot. And this thing comes from because he works in this area, he has researched in this area, he knows right from wrong. Of course, we have advertorials and campaigns every now and then telling, especially in rural areas, telling the people why they should not use firewood because it's bad for their health. It causes cancer, lung cancer, and, what have you. And then, we're asked to switch to cleaner energy, not necessarily gas, but there's a way it can be used that the energy will be clean. So what do the people do really? But there's just a small percentage of people that can do that. So what should people do for use as, energy in the terms of cooking, especially in rural areas, such that they will not resort to firewood all the time and, causing this depletion that we have. And then the second part of that question is, even when we talk about development, we talk about even the rural areas. When you're building your homes, you use wood, don't you, to prop up a lot of things. So apart from cooking and all that, wood is used essentially in a lot of things. So how do we get around this?
Well, to get around it, first and foremost, maybe we'll look at it from the policy angle. What do we have as an alternative to fuel use? We already know we have, for instance, gas. Yeah. But do we actually have we been able to distribute this gas to everywhere? In nooks and crannies of the country? I'm not too sure. But even if within the city we are seeing collapse of the national grid, what happens at the rural area? Will they get this electricity as well? I'm not too sure there. And so, in other words, their core alternative to any other source of supply is still the firewood. But interestingly, there have been different organizations coming up with different mechanisms or technologies, like clean cooking stoves. So you have those kind of stove that people have actually brought about that will use just small chips of wood. The sawmill, for instance, those chips, they can easily. And then some are turning them to briquettes. Okay. And so those are alternatives that could be used at the rural areas. Even now, I have even noticed that even within the cities, people are beginning to go into that rather than get firewood, because they know, you talk about the health aspect of it, they know that it's cleaner for the lungs, for the environment, and in fact, for the pocket as well, because it's also pocket friendly. And so you have that as an alternative. But the way we are also looking at it is that business can do better. Because when business do not actually, we talk about development, and business develop. An organization, for instance, a manufacturing organization, let's say a brewery, that relies on water. If that organization decides to pollute the water that it relies on because of development, there are challenges, whether it's in the rural area or otherwise. So in other words, the business must deliberately ensure that the business model is developed in a manner that watershed, wherever it is that they get water from, is protected heavily. Otherwise, they in turn will suffer for it as well. But we must, like you said, co-develop with the environment. We must. Otherwise, we will continue to have the ripple effect we see all around us in terms of the health impact on the economy itself, and so on and so forth. So in other words, business must begin to deliberately design their models in a manner that take all of this into consideration.
So how do we do that, Dr. Onoja? I think I've heard about China, and I think also somewhere in North Africa, where they are building large solar fields. And I think some other parts of Nigeria are also considering such large solar fields. And large solar fields mean no trees, no forests, unless we want to say it's a forest of solar plains and all of that.
Yeah.
So perhaps, again, I come back to that balance. For success to be tangible for us as a country, all these efforts we must find a way to pull them together. So is there a more structured effort to bring business into the conversation of conservation?
Yes. So, working very closely with the Natural Eco Capital and other partners, Business for Nature and so on, we're trying to, we've established what we call the Business Advisory Group, where we're trying to co-develop with the businesses, what we call the Business Action Plan, where businesses will be able to have a say, just like you mentioned. It's in the overall business strategy interest of businesses for them to look at nature as part of their raw materials, because if you are depleting your raw material, that means as a business you are not sustainable. So you need to think about it. So coming to your question about how we'll be able to make this happen, and that's why I am of the school of thought that we should always think of the end from the beginning. Just like we are running away from fossil fuels, we also need to think about this new solution that we are bringing. You talked about solar panels, because they are not just going to be on air. They are going to be necessarily be on land somewhere. I need to somehow clear the land. So what are these lands that we're going to be using? Are we going to be, start deforesting sensitive areas for us to be able to have these alternative energies or so on? And that's where we need to sit down and have research and evidence-based approach to all of this, because we have to look at probably degraded lands. We have to look at areas that can be used without necessarily tampering with sensitive areas. But all of these things needs to have all the interplay of all the stakeholders involved in that, so that businesses themselves, they will not end up shooting themselves on the leg by trying to just develop, just looking at one-way traffic without looking at the other implications of it. So what I'm trying to say is that all of us needs to come together to sit down on the right table and say, okay, this is the way we want to go, but what are the impacts that we're going to avoid? What are the mitigation measures that we're going to put in place, so that whatever developmental measures that we are taking doesn't eventually have a negative impact on us down the line?
I want to challenge you, Dr. Onoja, because I'm a big disciple of communication, so to speak. There's a way we have to begin to let people know the implications of not giving the due attention we should to nature. We are thinking now as a nation about a malaria-free country. But does malaria-free mean mosquito-free? Doesn't that also underscore the fact that maybe the malaria is what we want to get rid of, not the so-called malaria vector, none of that. So, again, I think there is a need to challenge you to say, look, how are we communicating these issues to our people?
Yeah, so, I mean, that is why a day like this exists, so that we'll be able to talk about it.
This is once a year.
Yeah, this is once a year. So that's why I said that is why a day like this. So it's a continuous thing. So we have an International Day of Forests, we have World Wildlife Day, we have World Wetlands Day, we have World Environment Day, we have different days. And then apart from that, there are structured programs that we, not just us, but other partners as well in the field, are trying to communicate with us. And yes, I agree with you that probably we need to also look at more innovative ways to get people involved in it. But one thing is that for people to really get involved in, they need to see what is a need for them. They need to see that connection. And that's why we are trying to create that connection, so that people will know that we are not apart from nature. We are part of it. Because whatever we spend, when we destroy nature, we spend much more to be able to replace the services that nature provides. For instance, if we destroy the forest, we're exposing ourselves as humans to some of the pathogens that we may not be immune to, that we'll be exposed to. Those pathogens were already locked up in the forest with these animals. But once we clear the forest, we'll start exposing ourselves to them. The snakes that are supposed to necessarily be in the forest will start coming to our homes to come and hunt the rodents that they were supposed to be hunting in the forest. But because we've destroyed them, they come to us. So these are some of these little things that we need to see, these connections that we have. So that's why I'm saying that we are not apart from nature. We are part of it. And if we destroy the ecosystem that supports us, our life support system, that's what I'm saying that we may be developing as wise fools.
Interesting. Well, Dr. Etua, as we mark International Day of Forests, sounds like Ogbujol then normally in my ears. What practical steps do you think we should be considering, particularly for businesses and stakeholders? What should they begin to do today to support a more sustainable and nature-positive future?
Thank you very much. And again, from what Dr. Noja has said, I think your question earlier, I think there's this phrase that is used now, a whole of society approach. What it implies that everyone must be part of it. And so we have decided to look at business. How can business integrate this as part of their overall decision making, as part of their business model, And so we're coming up with this business advisory group. Natural Capital, then the Nigeria Conservation Foundation, Business for Nature, and then Capitals Coalition. And so the idea here is to support the businesses to understand what they need to do. There are critical things they need to do that they are not doing now. Interestingly, they need to first and foremost even understand the opportunities therein for them. Because businesses want to see the opportunities before they go into it. And looking at the size of even the opportunities therein, I was going through the World Economic Forum report that refers to this, and it says that annually till 2030, we have 10 trillion opportunity of investment that is available for businesses. So in other words, those businesses or the CEOs who look at these things from the angle of CSR or corporate social responsibility, they want to start rethinking their business model. In fact, even globally, we're told that by the Global Biodiversity Framework, for instance, help us to understand that annually, the investment opportunity that we have is about $200 billion US. Businesses, early starters, for instance, in Nigeria, will benefit from all of this. If they continue the manner they have done the business before now, business as usual, they will not have that opportunity. So in other words, they need to know what their dependencies on the environment is. An organization that takes from the environment, because there is degradation of its raw material, the source of raw material, for instance, like water, will not be looking at inflation. We'll be looking at source of raw materials. And so, if your business model is not right, you eventually run into that trouble.
Well, I think just as you and both of you have said earlier, a day like this is a reminder. Let's just hope that we're able to sustain these lessons, not just for now, but for our future. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Dr. Eugene Itua is CEO, Natural Eco Capital, and as well as Dr. Joseph Onoja, Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. We await more communication from you on this matter.
All right, thank you very much.
And we will not wait for the next international day.
Exactly, yeah. We'll continue to push.